All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Baby in the House. Today, we have a big topic to discuss, and it is sleep training. Now, there are a lot of things that will bring out lots of discussion and controversy on any given Facebook post day, and sleep training is certainly in the top 5 amongst baby issues. So let's talk about sleep training because I have kids of my own. I have patients in practice. Tina has the research, the background, and we wanted to talk about sleep training and kind of get into the nitty gritty of it. And I will tell you that I'm not 100% familiar with Tina's approach to sleep training, although I've read from her book, The Bottom Line for Baby. And I don't think Tina knows exactly my take on sleep training. So this will be kind of a fun, talk through discussion. So hopefully things don't get too heated.
I know we might get in a little spat, but that's okay. If we have rupture, we'll just do repair. We'll just model how to do that as good parents and good people.
Exactly. Yes, we can do that. Okay, so you take it away, Tina. Tell us your take on sleep training, what you know about it, what the research shows, and we can just kind of have a back and forth.
Awesome. Well, I think, like always, anytime we're talking about something complex that's full of controversy and all of that, there are lots of good ways to be good parents, right? So
Yes.
Lots of families do things lots of different ways. That doesn't mean someone's better or worse, or, I kind of even bristle at the term good parent, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is, my intention here is to talk through sort of what the research says, how we think about it. I want to really learn from you. I hope you'll challenge me too. And I can talk about my own experience, and I think that'd be helpful to hear about yours as well. So where we really need to start, though, I think when we're talking about sleep training is with defining it, okay? Because sleep training can mean a lot of things. I mean, even like a parent keeping the lights dim while they change a diaper in the middle of the night, that is sleep training. Like, you're trying to get them used to, this is when we sleep, right? So there can really be a huge spectrum. So at one end of the spectrum, the more sort of aggressive cry it out methods, where you prepare baby for bed, you kiss baby goodnight, you set baby in the room, and then you don't see them till the morning. So that's like one
end of the spectrum.
The other end of the spectrum would be, approaches that attempt to keep baby from feeling more than mild discomfort or stress. So this would be, maybe nursing the baby almost to sleep and placing the baby down when the baby's really sleepy, and even patting them on the back, or what's called camping in, which I didn't know about when I had kids, where you sleep in the room, but and you're present, but you're not necessarily holding the baby, like you might be on a mattress on the floor. Some parents who co-sleep even consider that a form of sleep training. So we've got this huge spectrum of what that means. So the question is really more about how parents go about sleep training, right? And this is where the controversy comes in. So
I think a lot of parents decide, okay, we're going to sleep train our baby, which means we're unsatisfied with the current sleep situation and we want something to change. And so we're going to sleep train them. And that doesn't imply a specific method or anything like that. Just the fact that we kind of expected things to be better with the baby's sleep, and we would like to do some sort of intervention to improve that. I guess that's probably as generic of a way to describe sleep training as possible.
Yeah. They're like, we need to frickin' sleep. So we got right. And that's kind of the thing.
Which is a noble goal. Let's admit that it's okay to want to get good sleep. It's not selfish or, unloving to say, as a parent, I actually do need rest in order to function and connect and show up and be a present parent. Like, I do have to get some sleep.
Totally. I mean, sleep's not only it's important, right? We need it. And I think I want to say that too, and this is the case for really every topic in the Bottom Line for Baby book, is like, if you do what the research says across all these different topics, you're gonna, you can't do them all. Like, the research says it's really important that parents and babies get good sleep, but then the research also says, like, breastfeeding in the middle of the night can be really beneficial. You can't, a lot of them are mutually exclusive, so you can't do it all. And for sure, parents getting more sleep is good, and babies getting more sleep is good. The research is clear on that. So why don't we, for our purposes, really sort of talk about something between the two extremes, which is a more moderate kind of cry it out method, where parents are allowing the infant to cry or be upset for a predetermined amount of time, whatever that is.
Right.
And there are lots of different programs that recommend lots of different, approaches before going back in to offer comfort. So basically putting baby down while the baby's still asleep, it was kind of sleepy and ready for bed, and then waits before they go in, before they reassure, but still not picking the baby up. I think that would be like a good kind of moderate place for us to talk about. Okay. So
I think that's termed like graduated extinction, or like the Ferber method. I mean, there's like you said, there's a million different methods and everybody has their own little spin or take on it. But basically what you're saying is like, we put the baby down, they cry, we say, okay, timer set, 5 minutes, we're going to go in. And then we're going to say night night again. And then we'll come back at the 10-minute mark this time. And then the 15-minute mark. And then the 20, kind of work our way out. Is that what you're describing there?
Just increasingly expanding that amount of time and until the baby begins to fall asleep on their own, right? So, and this is most popularly known as Ferberizing, right?
Right.
And so when we're talking about this kind of sleep training, like when parents are considering any form of a cry it out method, particularly what we're talking about here, there are really three main questions that they have that we can answer, or at least talk about how it's hard to answer them. Okay.
Right.
So the first is it effective? Does it work? Right. And
right.
So
that was going to be my first question too, is does it work?
Yeah. So the second question though is it going to harm my baby? Is it bad?
Is it safe?
For my
Yep.
Is it safe,
totally.
Right? Is it going to damage my relationship with my baby, my bond with my baby? Is it going to undermine trust? Those are the three big questions.
Totally. That's what I hear all day.
Are there other questions I'm not thinking of?
Nope, those are the three questions. Does it work? Is it safe? Is it safe, for their medically, is it safe? And then is it safe for their emotional well-being and development, or are they going to rob liquor stores when they're 16 years old because I let them cry or something like that?
Right. Yeah, we do a lot of that fear-based parenting, right? Okay, yes. So let's start with the first one. Is it effective? Okay. And the research is pretty clear on this one. The research says that sleep training in that way is pretty effective. It does work. It does improve sleep for both parent and baby. And this has tons of benefits. So less parental fatigue. And I certainly know when I was tired as a parent, I wasn't a patient parent, right? So like, this is a thing. So it can, that's one of the things that's like, okay, well, does it harm my baby if I sleep train? But what are the impacts on my baby if I'm so grouchy and grumpy that I'm impatient with them all the time, right? So there's always like this cost benefit analysis. So it reduces parental fatigue. It improves parental mood. And we know that parental mood, particularly from the primary caregiver, is super important when you have a parent who's depressed in a significant way over a period of time. It has really a big impact on babies.
For sure.
So that's huge. Reducing parental depressive symptoms is a really important outcome that we hold in mind. And then the other thing the research shows that it benefits is less marital conflict. Now, notice it doesn't say better, more fulfilling marriages. It just says less marital conflict. Okay.
For sure.
These are tough times. So yeah, it works.
Doesn't fix everything, but certainly helps.
Yeah. So are we on the same page about that? It works.
Yes, for sure. I do think it works. And I do definitely see all of those tangential benefits to mood of parents, energy level, being able to be present and show up for your child because you're not so exhausted or resentful of how last night went, or just like trying to, phone it in. Like, it's like if I'm chronically tired, like during residency, I ate like a lot of Choco tacos and other terrible food at midnight because I was up and I was exhausted, and you don't make as good of food choices and health choices then. And the same thing applies when you're exhausted as a parent. You don't make the good health choices. You don't take care of yourself. You don't take care of your child in the same way because you're just like doing whatever it takes to survive. Maybe it's eating a lot more chocolate or fried food or those sorts of things as a coping mechanism. And so, and then the other benefit that I've seen too, in addition to the ones that you described, was the medical benefits for the child in terms of childhood obesity, and that there's a decreased amount of obesity in children that have undergone sleep intervention. I'll have to look up the study. I can find it though. In kids that have undergone a sleep training intervention, their risk of obesity is less.
Yeah, I did see that too. That's good. That's really important. Okay, so what about the second question? Does it harm the baby? Is it safe? And we're talking obviously physically, medically, but also emotionally. And I'll let you speak
Right.
to the safety medical issues. But this one's a little bit harder to answer. This one, the research has some blips in it. So this is, and you know, as in everything, you can find science that proves one way or the other
Right.
on pretty much anything. And so that's why this whole book was actually really challenging. But that doesn't mean we throw the whole thing out, because science really is our best way to make understanding, you know, to understand reality. But we have to know it's flawed. Okay, so so one thing that's really clear in terms of does it harm the baby is that in the short term, sleep helps in the short term for the baby. It's helpful to the baby, like we were just
Right.
talking about. Babies who sleep better are more adaptable. They have better emotional regulation. They're less easily distractible, so they can focus better and learn better. And some studies have shown no negative outcomes coming from sleep training in terms of their overall childhood behavior, even up to age 5 and 6. So there was a
Right.
longitudinal study on that. But opponents of sleep training who really look at this stuff and sort of look at science outside of just the sleep training, you know, or studies, talk about significant methodological problems, small sample size, lack of clear definition about what sleep training is, right? So how one parent defined it versus another, the methods used. And we know in the literature that parents, when we over rely on parental report,
Mm-hmm.
the study isn't as good. Parents are notoriously terrible at reporting objectively on our children.
Oh, for
Okay.
sure. Oh, they were such a great sleeper. I don't remember that. Or no, they were the fussiest baby ever. They never slept, from 0 to 2. I don't think they slept 6 hours that entire
I know.
2 years of life, sort of thing. Yeah.
We're terrible at that. So anyway, so there are some methodological problems there. But the other thing is that even though, you know, some of those studies are showing that, you know, there aren't negative outcomes, they weren't looking at if the infants experience the degree of stress those individual infants experienced at the time.
Sure.
Okay, so they may be okay in the long run, but what was that like for them at the time? And you know, an example of that a sleep training opponent would bring up is that, like Ferber, for example, at one point said that even if the infant vomits from stress, like if they're so upset that they throw up, you just go in, clean the baby, clean the sheets, and put them back, and you know, and keep going. So that would be sort of an example that talking about a baby whose stress response is so extreme that it's leading to that, and that when you know, babies have such individual temperaments. So for some babies, they can handle that kind of stress perfectly fine, and it can be resilience building. But babies just have a wide variety of hardiness and sensitivity. So for
Sure.
some babies, going through that process might be really, really stressful. And so a lot of the studies aren't looking at that particular piece around temperament and what the stress is like for different babies. So there's not complete agreement among experts about whether it's harmless,
Okay.
but we don't have evidence demonstrating that it is harmful. I
Okay.
know that's really not very helpful, but that's really the state of where the research is. What are your thoughts on safety, and will it harm babies?
So I think kind of the two issues that I try and talk through with parents on sleep training when they ask, because they all ask those exact questions, is it safe? And from a medical perspective, if you have a child that's typically developing and doesn't have any chronic medical issues, that it is very safe to allow for periods of fussing and crying, like most sleep training regimens, whether, the specifics of it. Sleep training is considered medically safe and beneficial for the reasons that we've already talked about. So I don't have concerns about their heart or their lungs or their brain, in terms of organ function, from going through sleep training, whether or not they cry for 5 minutes or much longer periods of time. It's of course unpleasant when they get to the point where they vomit or something like that. I find that that is very infrequent where they get themselves to that point. And I talk with parents about sleep training 7 or 8 days per week, it feels like.
However
And
many
I,
days plus some.
Yeah. And I feel like it is the very rare bird that actually vomits on a regular basis. And if they are doing that, it's usually so unpleasant that like I'm like, let's just take a break, guys. Let's give it a few more weeks or a month or two, and then let's readdress and try it again. Because oftentimes we just have a lot going on that adds to that. And so a nice little break in the span of their whole life of being a good sleeper, it won't hurt. It will make it hard to sleep for another month or so, but then we'll get through this and things
Yeah.
will be better then.
And that
And
baby,
so, yeah,
that baby might just be a super sensitive baby
right, right.
that has, or that maybe even has some, I mean, would that be a thing where you go, let's look and see if there's some reflux or some GI stuff going on as well? Like a,
Right.
right.
Certainly worth evaluating.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes that will be the case, or we'll just give it a little bit more time. Their system will mature as all babies do, and then they won't have that quite that strong reflex to throw up or get so upset that they throw up or things like that. So, I mean, there's always more time to just kind of push things down the road. I find that a lot of parents are worried that they're doing things wrong in the first 6 months that are going to set them up for bad sleepers. And I've never seen a baby that like couldn't move to being a better sleeper, just for however they were put down for the first 6 months or even year of life, that those things are all fixable and safe. So that was the real question is it safe? Yes, it appears to be very safe to go through sleep training, whatever the spectrum of wherever you lie on the spectrum of the sleep interventions. And then and the research that I have seen and read along the psychological aspects in the short and the long term is exactly what you're speaking to, which I haven't seen research that shows direct harm. Yes, there's a lot of methodological issues with it because it's a really tough thing to study.
Exactly.
And get good data. It's not like a short randomized controlled trial that you can do, because a lot of it relies on parents, giving up information that they're collecting and trying to remember when they're tired and exhausted and have a baby and toddler. And then you're asking them to remember it 5 years down the road or keep track of it for 5 years. And what did we do those nights? I can't remember. So that just makes it a difficult concept to study. But I feel comfortable and, within what is acceptable and good practice of medicine to say, yes, sleep training has benefits, and we know of no short or long-term harm to it, that we can proceed with sleep training if that's something that you guys want to do.
That's right. And there's benefits that have been demonstrated in the research
Definitely.
too. So, yeah. So there's a lot of reasons why parents might want to do it. Okay. So what about this third question? The parent-child relationship. If I let my baby cry, are they going to not trust me? Is it going to harm my relationship and bond? And again, as we expect, the research is mixed. So most of the studies say that sleep training either has no effect or a positive effect on the parent-child relationship. And so, one of the studies even said that it can improve parental relationship with their baby, maybe because parents are better sleeping, sleeping, babies are sleeping better, and so both are able to have better regulation and more shared joy during the day. So that's how I can kind of make sense of that. Opponents, however, point to a study that also had methodological problems. Okay, so we can't make determinations based on this study, but it's a really interesting one that should guide us to say, we need more research on this. So there was this one study that measured levels of the stress hormone cortisol, right? So that's a good indicator of states of stress. So this study found that after 2 nights of crying it out, babies stopped crying, okay, but their cortisol levels were really high still. So they were basically, what we determined from that is that they're stressed, but they're not communicating that they're stressed. And without the crying, the parents didn't know that their babies were stressed. So parents' cortisol levels were low and not in, usually parent and baby cortisol levels are fairly in sync in healthy parent-baby relationships because they're really, the parents are attuned to their child's emotions. But in this case, the parents kind of were being told everything's all right, good, this is, my baby's good, when in actuality, the baby's just learned to stop crying. So, obviously, besides the methodological issues, like they didn't do baseline cortisol levels. So that's a big issue. And so we should really be careful about interpreting the results. But this does raise a question that, a sleeping baby is not foolproof evidence that sleep training is successful across the board for all
Sure.
babies. So that's just one really interesting thing. And I think, it's really important that we're tuned into our babies and their communication. So another point that's really important, I think, to bring up is that some studies have looked at gentler forms of sleep training, like using parental presence, adjusting bedtimes earlier, nursing them until they're sleepier, using, more routines, like things like that,
Mm-hmm.
without the cry it out. And that research found that these milder methods offer many of the sleep-related benefits.
Sure.
The fervor kind of cry it out method. So if parents want to use strategies that don't involve the cry it out method, they have options, which is why I
Mm-hmm.
love that you have a program to help parents who are comfortable with the cry it out and parents who are not. You've got like two paths, and I've never heard of anyone who does that. And I just think that's so brilliant to really honor parents feelings about how to help get their kid to sleep. So that's that third question. What are your thoughts on that third question about the baby bond and
Right.
relationships, what you've seen? Or
So for me, I have seen some of those studies too, like the cortisol one, and I think there were some issues with that, like
for sure.
in regards to the testing and everything like that for cortisol. And then, when parents ask me, they want to make sure that they're not going to do anything that's going to harm that relationship in the long term. And I tell them I don't have any good research that shows that there is any harm in the long term. And in the short term, like you put your baby down, they smile at you as they drift off to sleep. When they come back in the morning, they're smiling at you as well. So it's not like they're going to be grumpy and hold it against you all day from any way that I can see or ascertain. I think it's a very personalized decision how to do sleep training and what that actually looks like. I will tell you, yes, I have this Mighty Sleepers program where I help get parents to get their babies to sleep better. And I used to try and convince everybody that my way was the right way. And I found that I cannot convince or change anyone's mind, and that these are deep-seated
Yeah.
beliefs and closely held values about their baby and crying and sleep and all of those things. So instead of like trying to browbeat people into thinking the way that I think about this, I just kind of help guide them along whichever path they like. And it's been really successful because there's a camp that is really comfortable with crying and doing cry it out, and it's quick and it's effective. And then there's a camp that is not interested in the crying and wants to do it in a gentle way that supports the baby with getting better sleep, but doesn't involve crying. And I think that wherever you fall on that spectrum of wanting better sleep, there's a way to get better sleep. And so I don't try and push parents down either path. I used to try and push them down the path of the quick and effective method, but I found that parents already have their deeply held beliefs way before we even have a baby, let alone talk about getting better sleep. And I'm just like going to honor their preferences and help them along that in the best way that I can. And both forms are effective. If you choose a cry approach, if you choose a no cry approach, I think both are effective and get the same results at the end of the day. It might just take longer to get one than the other, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not a big deal. And to answer the question of the parental-child bond, I do think that there is something to be said for a well-rested parent and a well-rested child having more positive interactions together and connecting more when you're awake and together and spending time together. And having those positive memories of, we went through that sleep training process and now we have such a great baby that sleeps great most of the time. And we get to have all these positive experiences, and I'm well rested too. And I'm recharged as a parent. Well, there's value to that too. And that is a benefit of going through the cost of those times of perhaps crying more. I also like to talk to parents about, if you take, all of the months and months of crying from like haphazardly trying to sleep train or just expecting things to get better, if you take all that time of crying and stress and add it all up, it's probably a lot more than a short period of time where you're doing a sleep intervention to try and get them on the path to better sleep. So you might be talking, about hours and hours or days worth of crying spread out over months and months versus a longer stretch of time over a short period of time, and it results in a lot less cumulative crying time. And parents seem to understand and appreciate that perspective on it too. I think at the end of the day, though, it's a very personalized decision for families.
It is. I can't imagine anything my pediatrician who I trust could tell me that would have changed my mind about how I wanted to do it on this matter. So I think you're right about that. And I think our job as professionals is to obviously make sure children aren't being harmed, but after that, where we might need to step in and use a little bit more, directive approach. But after that, our job is to really support parents in following their, inform them, educate them, support them, and then support them in the direction that they're going. And I think this leads us to the bottom line is that, there's no clear-cut research establishing that sleep training is directly harmful to babies. On the other hand, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on this. And we know that it offers benefits to parents and babies. But there is still this nagging question for me, looking at research outside of sleep literature, to ask that question, like, is there a cost? Is there a cost that comes? And as we know, the research is mixed on this. I think it's, as you said, so individualized, everyone's situation. Some people don't have even the luxury or the benefit of even making that choice, like their work schedule, their family situation, however, how many kids they have. I mean, you have a million kids, right? Like if you had
almost a million.
I mean, only 2 more than me, but that feels like a million. I would have kept going. My husband 3 was enough for him, but I would have kept going. But rest assured, parents, that according to much of the research, sleep training will likely be effective without harming your baby or harming your relationship with them, assuming, and this is important, that it's taking place in the larger context of an attuned, attentive, caring caregiver, who really, you're really attuning to your baby, following their lead, nurturing your relationship with them. So that larger context is probably more important than whatever decision you make specific to sleep training. If you do sleep train, educate yourself, find the most, healthy, relationship honoring method available that feels good to you. Most experts, and I want to hear what you think, Phil, advocate sleep training shouldn't start too early. And most of what I read was like never before 4 months. Most of them I saw was saying like 6, in the 4 to 6 month range. Some people recommend 6 months. What do you recommend about when to start? Okay.
Yep. I think not before 4 months. I mean, there's things you can do to try and establish a good routine and get their days and nights straight and all those things that just kind of help guide the baby to getting good sleep in the first few months of life. But the real sleep training that you want to say, where you're making a choice and a sleep intervention and something that you're doing, I think between 4 and 6 months is the correct approach based on their own development, realizing that some kids are ready to eat solid foods and sleep train at 4 months. Some are not ready to eat solid foods nor sleep train until closer to 6 months. But I think in that window somewhere is the right moment that it's okay to do it. And sometimes it just doesn't take, and you're like, okay, or maybe our baby's just not ready. Let's wait a couple more weeks. And it's amazing what a couple weeks can do for being ready for that. So if you try it too early, maybe baby just wasn't ready. Just like if you try green beans too early, maybe baby's not ready for those, but let's try it again and not just, throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, sleep training doesn't work. It didn't work for us when they were 4 months. It might just been that it wasn't the sweet spot. They were getting a tooth, something else went wrong. And so,
that's important. It's really sort of letting development unfold, following your babies on certain things. And I think it's really important too that we remember that babies are not great sleepers, and that a lot of times when parents are seeking sleep training, they actually are starting from a really unrealistic expectation of what a full night's sleep is or what good sleep is for their baby's age. I mean, I had a family reach out to me recently wanting to see one of our therapists because they were so distressed about sleep training, and they were so upset that their baby wasn't sleeping, but the baby was 2 months old. And so they just really needed some education around, and keeping in mind too, that you may have to repeat sleep training. Like you may do it and it may work. But then you go on a trip or your baby gets sick, and it's not like a one-time thing that you do and it just fixes everything. I think the other thing is that for me, I'm really uncomfortable under most circumstances about letting babies stay in really highly stressed states for really long periods of time. And so, I think that if you just, I think we just have to be really thoughtful about that. And I'll in a minute, I'll talk about what my most, I think, helpful advice on this is. But, if I want to say too to the parents, if you decide against sleep training, make sure you get sleep. Make sure you have a plan to take care of yourself, because, you matter too, parents. And if you're not able to drive safely, you're putting your whole family in
Right.
danger. So I think
Mm-hmm.
we just really have to, if it doesn't feel right to let your baby cry it out, you have to think about your own needs. But here's kind of my big thing, is that every child is different. Every family is different. Kids go through different phases. And I think that you have to look at the needs of your whole family. But for me, there's a huge difference in a baby that's fussing and trying to work it out, but not in a highly stressed state.
Sure.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yep.
But I think there's a big difference between a baby that's fussing and working it out and a baby that is giving what I would call an attachment cry. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is the baby is highly distressed. So we know there's positive stress, there's tolerable stress. So a baby that's fussing and trying to work it out, and they don't go into highly stressed states, it's more moderate or tolerable stress, that is resilience building. And that's the case whether you're talking about sleep training or going to a friend's house for the first time. Like if it's moderate, tolerable stress and they do it, that's good. That's resilience building. But when it crosses over into toxic stress, it actually undermines resilience.
Sure.
And so I think that, if a baby is having an attachment cry where they are highly distressed, I think leaving babies in that state, I'm really uncomfortable with that. I think that's potentially traumatic for some babies. So determining what that line is for your baby, that's what's tricky. And that's where we have to really listen to our instincts as parents. And, I know that in some cases, the stronger parent is instructed to restrain the weaker parent from going in and breaking the cycle. But that feels uncomfortable to me too, because I feel like we have those instincts and those pulls to protect our baby for a reason. Right. And so I think that's where you have to determine, is that the right thing for me?
Yeah, I think that is a really good point, and that it's important to be on the same page as a family too, because if one person's on board and the other person isn't, then it's not going to be successful. And it's really a shared conversation of our values and what this is going to look like and what the plan is going to be, and talking through and being open and honest about how you're feeling about that, rather than trying to strong arm one person into doing it or not doing it. That just doesn't seem right, fair, or that we're honoring the wishes of a member of the family. And so I think that is really important, is to talk that through and be on the same page. And if you're not on the same page, then either put a pin in it and come back to it later, or try and get more information so that you can be on the same page before you proceed with anything.
I think it's really important. I think, so I'm going to talk about what I did. Okay. And I will say that my kids were terrible sleepers and I was exhausted all the time. So know that as I'm talking about my experience. Now, by the time my kids were all 2, they were all great sleepers.
Okay, good.
They're all teenagers now, and they're making up for any lost time during infancy to go back.
They sleep in and don't bother you.
Exactly. So when my kids were little, I was working on my PhD and I was studying physiological states of stress, and I was studying attachment science, which is not the same thing as attachment parenting. Okay, so this is really the idea of mammal instinct. You and I talked about it in our other podcast recording about how when a child is in distress, a mammal child is in distress, there's a biological instinct for them to get close to their parent, for the parent to regulate their physiological states of stress. So I was studying that at the time. And I had a lot of friends who believed in and swore by sleep training. And they were like, this is a miracle. It's so great. And I just could not get comfortable with it because I felt like so I didn't do any kind of cry it out with any of my boys. As I said, though, I was exhausted. My husband is a professor. And so we could work things out where he could get up early with the kids and I could sleep later. Like our family schedule allowed for me to have enough rest to function. Otherwise I might've had to do things differently. But I read everything and I looked at all these different things, and I had friends who swore by it. And for some of them, I felt really jealous because their babies were sleeping better. For others, I felt really judgmental because I felt like what their babies, like when they would tell me these horror stories about their babies screaming for hours, like that felt really uncomfortable to me. So, I really because of my background in my research, I think for me, when it's about attuning to our children and that a cry is a communication that something isn't right. And again, it's good to give our babies opportunities to work that out a little bit on their own and not rush in and let them build that resilience. But if the way I responded during daytime hours was to respond if they had a need, I wanted to do that at night too. So, and I was frustrated and tired and probably really grumpy. So I'm not sure it was the right decision. I know myself, and I know I would have regretted doing any kind of cry it out.
Right. Which is what you don't want to leave, you know, toddlerhood and everything with, is this regret and questioning of yourself.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, like your decision was the right decision for you, because it allowed you to feel that, you know, comfort with responding to their needs. And yes, it was very tiring times, but now they're good sleepers.
I really do strongly believe that if a baby is in intense distress, that is not okay to leave them for long periods of time, just based on what I know about the physiological states and all of that. But I just really, for me, it was a big sacrifice to not sleep train, but that's what felt right to me. And like I said earlier, you know, every decision you make, none of them are in isolation. Our decisions are part of a web of decisions. So as I decide that means, oh, I'm a little bit grumpier during the day, and my husband and I have less time together. Like, it's all an interconnected web. And so we really have to make the decisions that are right for our families. So I am a big believer in attunement and responding when babies are in distress, and not leaving them in stress states for long periods of time. And that's really where I am. And the research really says a lot of things that can counter that too. So anyway, that's like I said at the beginning, there are lots of ways to be a great parent. And the bottom line of the bottom line is, I think a lot of these decisions we make around sleep training and all these other kinds of things, that in the context of a larger connected attachment relationship where we're tuning into our baby's needs, you know, most of the time, it probably doesn't matter all that much, because my friends who were doing sleep training that was more cry it out and more aggressive, and I was doing the really gentle things, we all had babies who slept well by the time they were 2, and they all turned out to be great kids. So I'll leave it at that. What about you, Phil? Any other thoughts on?
I think you're right. No, I think it's very individualized. Like for us, I was going through medical school and residency, so kind of figuring all these things out and looking at the research as well. And our decision was to get them to be sleep trained when they were able. And I think I'm trying to remember back, and it hasn't been that long now, but we were more of the allowing for longer periods of crying. I don't honestly remember how long it was, because I don't think it was that long that we would leave them unattended to cry, but it was quick. And within a few nights, honestly, they were sleeping well. And we've done that with each of our kids. And so we have 5 good sleepers. And you have good sleepers too. So they both turned out well. And I think that kind of is almost circular to what we started this whole conversation with, is that there's a spectrum of decisions for the sleep choices. And like you said, at the end of the day, it probably isn't going to make a big difference if it's in the context of a connected, attuned family, and we're able to have those moments of connection and bonding and safety and security with our children at other points in the day. And they're all going to turn out fine. And some people are better rested when their baby is 1 and they're super, but some people are more comfortable with just waiting and allowing it to happen naturally, and they're great too. So I really don't think, if you have the context and if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably already like interested enough in parenting that you're probably doing the best to attune and connect with your family, that you really can't go wrong with the choices that you make.
That's really key. And I think that idea of, you know, this is from the attachment literature too, that really tuning into our babies and responding to their needs, you know, quickly and sensitively, so that they know that if they have a need, we will show up for them. We should be doing that as much as we can. And then we can sort of think about sleep as a whole other thing, you know, that's what I just said is important, whether or not you decide to sleep train. That's really the most important thing we need to do for our babies. And I think our job as parents is to, you know, regulate their physiological states. Like when, when an infant gets a vaccine in your office, the parent immediately holds them, rubs them, rocks them, does things to regulate that physiological response. But that's a high stress response. And that's why, again, I go back to that thing where I think there's a huge difference with an infant that is in tolerable stress versus an infant that's in toxic stress. And every parent has to decide where that line is for their infant. And I think that, and the other thing too is, like I said, some babies are just hardier and some are more sensitive. And that may be part of why I went down the path I did too, is because my firstborn was a really sensitive kid. And for some babies, I mean, I don't know how often you see this, but I think I've also heard that parents, try lots of different things. And for some babies, they just have needs that they're not ready yet. And it just may not be, may not work for that baby at that time, even though it's a typical age for other people. So I think that's really, really important that we remember that we need to inform ourselves and educate ourselves, but we should really trust our instincts and really listen to our baby. And if it's not working or it's too stressful to you or your baby, hold off. You don't have to do it within that particular month, or your child will never be a good sleeper. That's just not true. So
totally.
Just really trust yourself and trust your baby and do what works for your family. Again, benefits, like there's that cost benefit analysis, right? Like my baby might be really stressed for a couple nights, but I'm not going to be stressed for 6 months and yell at you for 6 months, right? So we just have to look at all the bits and pieces and decide what's right for our own families.
Well, I think as we record this and we're kind of in the midst of coronavirus and everything like that, like everybody has gotten a master's course in cost benefit ratios of late in all the decisions that we're making. And this is just another one of those decisions that you have to, as an individual patient or parent and family, make that decision and trust your instincts, like you said, and move forward, and try not to let people either judge you for doing one thing or for not doing one thing, and to be comfortable and confident in yourself as a parent that you've done the research, you've made the right choice for your family, and we're marching forward.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if we cleared everything up. We definitely, I think, tackled a controversial subject in a peaceful and connected sort of way. You even threw in vaccines to mention another controversial topic in the same breath, but
yeah, let me just stack them back to back.
Right, exactly. Oh my goodness. Well, this has been another episode of Baby in the House, and we will see you again next week.